if the Americans decide that they really are going to have to get involved again because the Houthis are now doing what they were supposed not to do under the ceasefire agreement, they are going to have to start addressing the issue of supporting the anti-Houthi forces in Yemen.
I think, first of all, we must just almost refresh ourselves on knowledge of the Houthis and how well armed they are. And these two coordinated attacks on these vessels just in the last few days, they're not afraid to demonstrate their capabilities.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. The Houthis are certainly bold. There's no sort of hesitation about them. They're very aggressive. They're quite confident, and they are very resilient. They can take a punch as well. So they're on a certain level. They are a formidable opponent. But of course, the people that they're targeting are not well defended, and it's not something that we should be. I don't think they deserve too many compliments for being able to take out commercial shipping.
Yes, fair enough. And indeed, I suppose then we must consider what retaliation against the Houthis does look like, because President Trump has bombed the Houthis previously. Israel has taken action also. I'm trying to determine how much of a setback those sorts of attacks have actually been.
Yeah, it's a really fair question. Now, I mean, as you know, the Houthis endured a sustained campaign by the Saudis over many years. And so, they proved that they were resilient and that they could continue to fight in spite of facing superior weaponry. The Israeli attacks on the Houthis have been relatively minor attacks. Israel never mustered the kind of firepower or the kind of aerial domination that it did in Iran in June. But what it has been doing has been trying to show the Houthis that attacking Israel is not without a cost. And the Israelis have been fairly aggressive in terms of their targeting. And one thing that is worth noting is that they have very severely damaged Hodeidah port. Now, Hodeidah port is the most important port in Yemen, and certainly by far the most important port that the Houthis control. And the majority of the berths of that port are out of action, and the Houthis are clearly struggling to repair the damage. So the Israelis did some damage. The Americans were in a different order altogether. The Americans were bombing the Houthis for 7 weeks, and they threw a lot at them. And they did a lot of damage to Houthi weaponry, Houthi infrastructure. They also took out a number of senior Houthi leaders and military commanders. And I think it's fair to say that by the time that the Omanis brokered the peace agreement or I shouldn't say peace agreement, they brokered the ceasefire between the Americans and the Houthis in May, it's fair to say, I think, that the Houthis needed that respite.
In terms of attacking the Houthis, help us understand, because I for myself, I often compare how you strategize against a group like the Houthis compared to, for example, targeting a nation state. Perhaps if we were to compare and contrast the targeted attack by the Americans against the Iranians and their nuclear capability just a number of weeks ago following the airstrikes between Israel and Iran. That's almost more conventional in my own thinking. Is it fair to consider the Houthis as so part of Yemen that they can be targeted in the same way? You talk there of the port, the Hodeidah port, that they control. But is it more complex than that when it comes to actually targeting them?
I mean, it is more complex, and I think your reservations are correct. So there simply aren't high-value targets like Fordow or Natanz or Esfahan. So with Iran, you're dealing with a nation state. It's got an organized military with very easily identifiable military bases. It's got a nuclear program with sites that were known about. They were very well defended, very well buried, but nevertheless, it was possible to attack them. And with the kind of firepower, of course, that the Americans eventually brought in on that to do very severe damage to them. With the Houthis, it's much more diffuse. It's much more dispersed. Some of it is pretty well hidden. Often you're attacking really small formations. The thing the Americans did that was not much commented on at the time, but was possibly the biggest problem that they caused the Houthis was that they prevented the Houthis from fighting the civil war. Because, of course, the Houthis are still trying to defeat the internationally recognized government of Yemen. And their current objective is to take a large strategic city called Marib. And they were massing forces and they were doing engineering works to try to take Marib. Now, when the American aerial campaign was going for those 7 weeks, the Houthis had to disassemble their forces and their engineering because they knew that it would be shredded from the sky.
Yeah, so that's fascinating as well. We must consider the domestic situation for Yemen, for people in Yemen as well. So the Houthis active against the Yemen government. What is the international kind of consideration of the government in Yemen? Is there international support? You mentioned international recognition, but is there support to defend, to maintain that government within Yemen itself and to try to stabilise that situation?
So there is, and as I said, it is still the internationally recognized government. Sure. And in the past, it's had very energetic, very effective support from the Saudis, the Emiratis, and their Arab allies. The problem, of course, has been that as the campaign to try to defeat the Houthis on the ground in Yemen became increasingly unpopular, and people felt that it was aggravating a humanitarian crisis inside the country, the Saudis started to become anxious about the degree of international criticism that they were drawing. They became increasingly keen to get out of the conflict. So they then were twisting the arm of the internationally recognized government to be less aggressive. And there are a number of recent cases where the internationally recognized government has wanted to take certain measures and they've been dissuaded by the Saudis, who've been trying to see whether they can negotiate some kind of exit from the Yemeni civil war with the Houthis. So that has been the sort of, if you like, the internationally recognized government has not done enough to convince the Saudis that it is necessarily going to be successful in defeating the Houthis. And the Saudis, when they were most aggressive, which was in 2018, and they were going to attempt to take the port of Hodeidah at that time on the Red Sea. You may recall that was when the journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed, and it led to a turning of international opinion against the Saudis, and then to the Stockholm Agreement, where the Saudis agreed not to take the port of Hodeidah. So that was a sort of a disaster at that time, which stopped the Saudis in their tracks. The fact of the matter is that the Saudis could resume this effort with the internationally recognized government. It isn't straightforward. The internationally recognized government is not necessarily the most efficient, the most representative government. It has its own internal difficulties. And these days, of course, there is a very strong southern secessionist tendency. So you're dealing not just with the government itself, but also with the so-called Southern Transitional Council. And so backing those forces against the Houthis is a complicated process. But the reality is that the Houthis can't be defeated from the air, just from the air alone. And so if the Americans decide that they really are going to have to get involved again because the Houthis are now doing what they were supposed not to do under the ceasefire agreement, they are going to have to start addressing the issue of supporting the anti-Houthi forces in Yemen.
Edmund, thank you ever so much. That's a brilliant, brilliant conversation. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.